Upon leaving the Schillingers, Kurt was invited to stay with school friend and fellow member of the Aberdeen punk scene, Chris Novoselic. The pair began to play and experiment with music in a collaboration which was to become the genesis of Nirvana.
Eventually, songwriting became this way to tell his story, and that's what made music so much more compelling for him. He began to write a lot of little short stories and tales in his journals, and he began to set some of those to music around that time. I think you cannot underestimate the role of Chris Novoselic. Kurt meets him around the time he's 18, and Chris really, throughout the rest of Kurt's life, the next 9 years, becomes the one anchor that Kurt always can go back to.
Novi in high school, God, was just a one-man entertainment show.
Yeah, Novoselic was the class clown that was older.
And he was real tall.
Ran for student body vice president at one point. And I remember my sister saying, stay away from that guy. He ate rhododendrons, those flowers.
He would come out in a, what do you call that before a football game? And a pep assembly. And Novoselic would come out there on the basketball court and just throw together a skit, you know, just off the top of his head, and have the whole school, 600 people laughing.
But people that, they always said they were outsiders, and they made themselves outsiders. Novoselic, people liked him. You could go to parties with Novoselic, and people would say, oh, Novi, ah.
I think
and Kurt was always welcome too, but he decided he wanted more than that, you know.
Yeah.
He decided he didn't want to, I don't know, he felt alienated, even though he wasn't really.
In September 1986, Wendy Cobain loaned Kurt $200 to move into a house with Matt Lukin from the Melvins. 1,500 East 2nd Street was quickly turned into more of a rehearsal space than a house, and it was here that Kurt and Chris' music really begun to take shape.
Chris says, you ought to come over, we're practicing or whatever, we've got this band together. So we went to this little house over on the east side of Aberdeen, just look dive. I don't know if you guys got a chance to look at it, it's still there. And Matt Lukin and Kurt were living together. Well, I knew Matt from the Melvins from before, and so anyway, we wandered on in, and it was pretty scary, borrowed equipment.
It was behind the Thriftway on B Street in Aberdeen, and it was a horrible little house, but he was really proud of it. I remember that he was really hurt because he showed it to his mom, who didn't live that far away at the time, and she said that she didn't like the idea of her son living in a rundown nigger shack. And it really hurt his feelings because he was really proud. This was his house, you know. He was very possessive of it. My house, you know, it's not a crummy apartment, it's a house, and it was like a little two-bedroom thing that he lived with Lukin.
Probably should have been bulldozed at the time. It really wasn't technically inhabitable, but they lived there anyway, and Kurt rarely worked and had little money, and so before too long we got to be friends and whatnot, and I worked, and I was comfortable, and I would cook and eat well, and so I'd invite him over for dinner, and of course then we'd talk more about music, and he ended up being a tremendous influence on me, music-wise, and of course I was interested. I've always had a passion for music. So my relationship with the band just grew tighter and tighter and tighter in the sense that I was an enthusiast, I appreciated their music, I desperately desired this sort of cultural information from them, and was a volunteer, you know, a patron, where they needed something, I was more than willing to, you know, volunteer. And that's really what the relationship later, as things began to be more productive, is, you know, it wasn't that I was ever asked formally to do anything for them. I just volunteered.
As the fledgling band started to gather an original repertoire, Ryan Aigner, a friend of Cobain and fan of the music, managed to secure a gig in Raymond, a small town south of Aberdeen. In March 1987, Nirvana embarked on their first and possibly most infamous performance.
The band plays their very first show at this kegger in Raymond, Washington. pretty amazing event. I went and sat in the house they played in and managed to pull together a handful of people who were at that show to describe it to me, and it was a pretty remarkable event.
Ryan came over,
Yeah.
and he would always come over here and we'd be playing and jamming and stuff. And he said he was managing that band at the time. I'm assuming he was. And he said, you got to hear these guys. These guys are really good. And he said, well, bring them on over, you know, on some weekend. I can't remember what the exact date is.
Yeah.
I think it was what?
It was March of '87.
It was like March of '87.
There's just some teenagers that, well, they're not teenagers, they're 20-something crowd guys that lived in this house, and every Friday and Saturday night was a party anyway. And whether the band played or the stereo played was no big deal to them. They didn't have outsiders coming in. It was a tight social circle again. There were the band dudes, and there were the groupie dudes, and then all our girlfriends and whatnot. So then this one Saturday, I had made these arrangements to bring these guys down. Well, it was the same problem with Nirvana. You know, they didn't, well, they weren't called Nirvana then, but you know, they'd just been rehearsing in this house. They hadn't done anywhere, gone anywhere, done anything, and I made this suggestion, maybe we should try something, go see what, you know, public reaction would be like. Well, the minute I even, you know, discussed it with Kurt, he was like, Raymond, that's going the wrong way, dude. You know, we don't want to go down into, you know, the interior. You know, we want to go to the city, get out of the swamp. But he agreed to go. And so we get there and we kind of socialized for a while, and he played. And from the very beginning, you know, it wasn't. He didn't put on a special performance for them. If you run the reel forward and look at the sort of classic Nirvana performance, it was all there, everything. Same thing he did that night was same show he put on 4 or 5 years later, and but those people were watching a show that, you know, they were used to entertainers. When the guitar turned on, this very introverted sort of person took an incredible amount of intensity, which, you know, if you were close to him at all and you talked to him, you'd know this. But just to see him physically, he wasn't particularly animated or whatever. But when that guitar came on, the energy, he started to push out through the speaker. You know, he wasn't an animated performer either, but he terrorized the sound waves that night. Well, these people were they listened to classic rock, you know, and this guy was just feedback Blue Cheer style. I mean, just woo, going on and on and on and on and on, and then finally break into these songs. Well, and weren't that they were bad songs, they were performed badly at all. They were new.
It was definitely different. I think that the whole crowd here was really mixed.